Hi guys, and welcome to Global Film Pool. On today's video we are going to look at the documentary Music is My Life, which is about the international world music sensation that is Ladysmith Black Mambazo. Music is My Life was South Africa's submission for the 96th Academy Awards for Best International Feature Film. If you are new here, my name is Paul, and I review the best of world cinema and follow the race for Best International Feature Film Oscar, from countries selecting their film to the final winner. In this video, I'm first going to review the film, followed by an analysis of how well it did at the Oscars, and then I'll look at a more historic view of how South Africa has done at the Academy Awards. So let's roll and review the film. Music is My Life tells the story of Joseph Shabalala, the key figure of the international sensation that is Ladysmith Black Mambazo. The documentary covers from his early childhood to multi-million record sales. We see the impact of apartheid on his music, to the also controversies that he had for breaking free from it and working with white artists such as Paul Simon. We also look at their recognition amongst the global film community, with legends such as Dolly Parton, Paul Simon, and many others who have all worked with him. The documentary really demonstrates how the group managed to move themselves away from just African music and making a global sensation, stepping out the quite narrow focus of world music. I often find documentaries quite divisive. They're either really cinematic and should be seen on the big screen, or they're very televisual with lots of talking heads telling a narrative that is very A to B to C. Music is My Life manages to incorporate some aspects of cinematography. There's particular brilliant usage of landscapes and rural South Africa, and quite astonishing views of like dances and particular tribal clothing. It really creates a sense of a feast for the eyes, and also provides some insight into the philosophies and religious views of the Zulu tribe and wider African culture. Despite all this beauty, it does tell his story in a very conventional pedestrian way. It is very much his life from birth to death, with some exploration of philosophies, as I said before. There is some interesting family footage, and it does provide that philosophical context, which really gives you insight into where his music comes from his heart and from his values and from his beliefs. I do think it's very talking head celebrity heavy, which on the whole we're not necessarily adding a lot to the discussion, more like isn't he wonderful? And it got a bit repetitive in that sense. So overall, I would give Music is My Life 3 stars, as I feel it has lots of beauty and provides really insightful insight into what it's like to live in South Africa and grow up the way he did, what importance is music in terms of cultural representation across the world. However, it does feel very depleted in its narrative telling and quite conventional and nothing beyond the sort of normal approaches to such documentaries. This sort of documentary telling is not the most successful form of documentaries to do well at the Oscars. It feels very conventional. It doesn't elevate it beyond the sort of televisual documentaries that you would expect. But one thing I want to make absolutely clear, this is no reflection on his life or his musical abilities, because he's clearly very talented and is hugely important to African culture. So let's have a quick look at how it did at the Oscars. It should not come to any great surprise, but it was not shortlisted for Best International Feature Film. It came from a Sky Original production, and it's very sort of in keeping with the other Sky Original documentaries, which aren't necessarily eligible for such awards. It's a very worthy topic, it portrays him in a very positive light, and it can be at times really beautiful to watch, but it's not as elevated as some of the other documentaries that were submitted in the Oscar category, such as 20 Days in Mariupol for Ukraine or Four Daughters for Tunisia, which will really elevate their documentary telling and provide something that's a bit different from your standard documentary. South Africa didn't submit in 2022 a film, and this being submitted in 2023 perhaps suggests COVID has played a huge part in terms of the number of films being produced in South Africa. Clearly, 1 year of the pandemic, they weren't able to make a film good enough to enter the category, and they probably had slim pickings for the next year, still recovering from the pandemic, and with a Sky Original, which would qualify for the Oscar, kind of made a bit of sense. My own personal rankings of all the submissions for the 96th Academy Awards, I would put Music Is My Life at 42 out of 51 films. It's really hard for documentaries to compete, especially if you have some very successful ones. The fact it didn't get shortlisted at the same time for Best Documentary suggests it wasn't particularly in the running for Best International Feature Film. So if we now look at South Africa's performance at the Oscars, in the last 10 years, South Africa has submitted 9 films for the Best International Feature Film, and only one managed to get on the shortlist, but nowhere further. This was The Wound, which was a sort of queer story based in the tribe in South Africa, and it got to the shortlist in 2017. In the rankings of the last 10 years, South Africa would rank 43rd most successful country. The previous year, where they did not submit a film, has damaged them a little bit, but their only one shortlisted film within the last 10 years shows that they're perhaps not on a very positive trajectory at the moment. And if we look at how South Africa had done historically, they are ranked 52nd overall. They won in 2005 with Tutsi, and in the previous year, they had a nomination with Yesterday. They've had 2 shortlisted films, including 2017's The Wound, but also Life Above All in 2010. What's really impressive is when they got their first nomination in 2004 for Yesterday, they had only submitted 2 films previously, which shows their form in the category really kicked off South African cinema during the noughties in a post-apartheid situation. I think there is huge potential for South Africa to do well in the category in the future. They had a great success in the noughties and had a bit of issues in the last 10 years, partly due to things like the pandemic. But actually, I understand there's momentum in the industry to become one of the global leaders in film and television. So I could see potentially more investment in film, which will eventually lead to higher quality of films. So it would not surprise me in the next 5 or 10 years to see South Africa rise up the rankings and become almost a regular on the shortlist, and occasionally maybe even win another Oscar. If they can find consistency in both number of films submitted and the quality of films submitted, I can see South Africa doing extremely well. If you want to follow the journey for Best International Feature Film, please do like and subscribe my content.